"You're not part of the real family, Emily, only we are." Those words would replay in her mind for weeks, sharp, deliberate, and cruel. Emily Carter had spent most of her life trying not to care about things like that. She was a project manager at a mid-sized tech company in Seattle, the kind of woman who planned everything down to the minute, her calendar color-coded, her workspace spotless, her future carefully mapped out. On paper, her life looked perfect. Good salary, good apartment, good credit. The kind of stability she'd built entirely by herself. But the one thing she could never control was the way her family saw her. To them, Emily had always been the cold one, the distant daughter who moved too far away, who worked too much, who never calls enough. No matter how many times she flew home for holidays or remembered birthdays, she always felt like a guest at her own family's table. Her older sister Vanessa was the opposite. 30 years old and still treated like the family's crown jewel. Vanessa had the soft smile, the sweet voice, the perfect timing. She was the kind of person who could spill red wine on the carpet and still make everyone else apologize for upsetting her. Growing up, the difference between them was like night and day. When Emily got a B+, their mother would sigh and say she could have done better. When Vanessa forgot an assignment entirely, their father laughed it off. She's creative, not organized. By the time they reached college, the pattern was set in stone. Emily paid her own way through scholarships and part-time jobs, working late shifts at a campus cafe. Vanessa, meanwhile, attended a private university across the state. Her tuition, car, and apartment fully funded by their Uncle Richard. Uncle Richard wasn't just wealthy, it was old money, smart, a self-made real estate mogul in his early 60s who had built an empire from nothing. He never married, never had kids, and took it upon himself to help his sister's family whenever he could. But Richard wasn't generous out of guilt or love. He was testing people. He believed money revealed who you really weren't. Over the years, he'd learned exactly who in the Carter family could stand on their own, and who couldn't. He once told Emily, during a Thanksgiving dinner when everyone else had gone to bed, "You're the only one in this family who doesn't expect a handout. Don't lose that." She remembered those words more clearly than anything her parents had ever said to her. It was the first time anyone in her family had acknowledged her effort instead of her absence. Of course, Vanessa hated that. She didn't say it directly. Vanessa never did, but Emily saw it in the small, cutting remarks. The comments about how money doesn't buy happiness, or how some people only work because they don't have anyone to take care of them. It was always framed like a joke, yet every punchline hit a little too close. The Carters' parents, Mark and Linda, pretended not to notice. They loved both their daughters, or so they said, but their definition of love had always been skewed. To them, affection meant comfort, and, since Vanessa needed the most comfort, she received the most love. When Uncle Richard paid off her student loans, bought her a new SUV, and later helped her and her husband, Daniel, with a down payment for their first home, nobody blinked. When Emily quietly mentioned that she'd just finished paying off her own loans without help, her mother only smiled and said, "Well, that's what happens when you're the strong one, honey. You don't need us." Emily had learned long ago not to expect fairness, but knowing something and feeling it were two different things. And sometimes, the imbalance was so obvious it burned, like every December. When Uncle Richard planned his grand family Christmas trip, it had become tradition over the years. One week in a luxurious location, everyone together, pretending to be closer than they actually were. Richard claimed it was his way of keeping the family together. In reality, it was a carefully disguised social experiment, a stage where everyone revealed who they truly were once the champagne started flowing. This year's destination was a ski resort near Aspen, Colorado. It sounded perfect: snow-dusted mountains, cozy lodges, the kind of place where people wore matching sweaters for family photos. Emily almost didn't go. Work was busy, and part of her knew what to expect. The subtle digs, the hierarchy, the same dynamic as always. But she told herself it was only a week, a few days of polite small talk for the sake of peace. Maybe this year would be different. Richard had asked Vanessa to handle the travel arrangements. "She's got free time," he'd said. Emily didn't argue. She was too tired to fight about things that didn't matter, at least. That's what she thought. In the weeks leading up to the trip, Emily worked late to meet her company's project deadline. Her co-workers teased her for being married to her job. She laughed it off, but she knew why she pushed herself so hard. Success was her only shield, the only thing that made the constant comparison bearable. By the time she finally packed her suitcase and boarded her flight to Aspen, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a while. Maybe a week in the snow would help her breathe again. When she arrived at the resort, the world looked like a painting: snow-covered roofs, glowing windows, laughter spilling from the lobby. For a moment, she felt like she was walking into a Hallmark movie, until the receptionist frowned. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the woman said softly, checking her screen again. "We don't have a reservation under your name." At first, Emily assumed it was a mistake. A typo, maybe. Vanessa could be forgetful. Maybe she'd mixed up the details. But when Vanessa appeared in the lobby coat, pristine, smile bright, husband by her side, Emily realized it wasn't a mistake at all. Vanessa looked genuinely surprised to see her. Didn't I tell you? I only booked rooms for the real family, you know. Mum, Dad, me, Daniel, and Nate." She laughed lightly, as if she'd just told an inside joke. For a moment, Emily couldn't speak. The words didn't register. Not right away. She looked to her parents, standing a few feet behind, but neither of them said a word. Her father avoided her eyes. Her mother gave a small, helpless shrug. Vanessa tilted her head. "But you're so independent, right? I'm sure you can find something nearby." The sentence hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. Emily felt the heat rise to her face, but she refused to give Vanessa the satisfaction of seeing her break. Years of practice had taught her how to wear calm like armor. She forced a small smile, nodded once, and said quietly, "Of course. Enjoy your holiday." Then she turned and walked out, the sound of her boots crunching through snow louder than any goodbye. As the cold wind bit her skin, something inside her shifted. The humiliation stung, yes, but beneath it was something else, something steady. For the first time, she wasn't angry, she was done, and as she dragged her suitcase toward the next hotel down the road, a single thought echoed in her mind, quiet but certain: blood doesn't make you family, respect does. For a moment, the mountain air felt like freedom. Emily thought this Christmas might finally be different, peaceable, quiet, maybe even warm. She was wrong. The flight to Aspen had been delayed by a few hours. She didn't mind. Deadlines at work had kept her late anyway, and she figured arriving a little after everyone else might spare her the small talk. By the time her cab pulled up to the resort, the sun was melting into the white peaks, casting gold across the snow. It looked like something out of a postcard. Families laughing, lights twinkling, fireplaces glowing behind tall glass windows. For once, Emily allowed herself to exhale. She dragged her suitcase across the cobblestone drive and stepped inside the grand lobby. The air smelled of pine, cinnamon, and expensive champagne. She approached the front desk with a polite smile. "Hi, I'm checking in Emily Carter, the Carter family reservation." The receptionist hesitated, fingers gliding over her keyboard. "Of course, Ms. Carter, one moment." The silence stretched. The woman frowned, typing faster. "I'm so sorry, but I don't see a reservation under your name." Emily blinked. "It should be with the Carter family. My sister Vanessa handled the bookings." The receptionist checked again, her tone careful now. "We do have rooms for Mark and Linda Carter, Vanessa and Daniel Carter, and their son Nathan, but no, there's nothing for an Emily Carter." For a second, Emily thought maybe it was a clerical error. Vanessa could be careless, forgetful at best, self-absorbed at worst. Mistakes happened, but the thought didn't settle right. She took a deep breath. "Would you mind calling my sister? I'm sure it's just a mix-up." Before the woman could answer, a familiar voice cut through the chatter of the lobby. "Oh my God, Emily, you're here." Vanessa glided in from the lounge, draped in a designer coat the color of champagne. Her hair curled perfectly, her lipstick unbothered by the cold. Behind her trailed Daniel, holding a mug of cocoa and wearing the smile of a man who'd long learned to stay quiet. Emily smiled, relieved. "Hey, looks like there's been a mistake with the rooms." But Vanessa was already shaking her head, the same way someone might scold a child for not understanding the rules. "Oh, sweetie, it's not a mistake." Emily froze. "What do you mean?" Vanessa's tone softened, but her smile sharpened. "I only booked rooms for the real family. You know, Mom, Dad, me, Daniel, and Nate." The words didn't hit all at once. They fell, one by one, like shards of ice. Emily's mouth went dry. She turned to her parents, who stood a few feet away near the fireplace. Her father shifted uncomfortably, pretending to study the decor. Her mother gave a small, apologetic shrug, like there was nothing she could do. Vanessa tilted her head, her earrings catching the light. "Don't look at me like that. You're so independent, right? I figured you'd prefer your own space. There's a cute inn down the road. I'm sure you'll find something nearby." It was the kind of smile only Vanessa could manage, warm on the surface, cruel underneath. For a long moment, Emily said nothing. Her throat burned, but she refused to give Vanessa the satisfaction of seeing her hurt. She inhaled slowly, the smell of pine now somehow suffocating. Then, with a calmness she didn't feel, she said quietly, "All right, enjoy your holiday," and she turned to leave. Outside, the air bit at her cheeks. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she pulled her suitcase down the slope toward the taxi stand. Her heart pounded not from the cold, but from the effort of staying composed. She'd always known she didn't quite belong, but hearing it said aloud, that was new. Still, anger wasn't what she felt. Not exactly. It was clarity, sharp, cold, undeniable. Inside, Vanessa was probably laughing already, telling the story like it was some harmless joke. Her parents would sigh, maybe call it just a misunderstanding, then go on pretending everything was fine, but Emily was done pretending. 10 minutes later, she found another hotel, smaller, quieter, the kind of place that smelled like coffee and cedar wood instead of money. They had one suite left. It was expensive, but she didn't hesitate that night. As snowflakes gathered on the balcony railing, she sat with a glass of wine and her laptop open. Without really planning to, she texted her two best friends, Kate and Grace. "You guys doing anything for Christmas?" Kate replied first, "Not really. My family's skiing in Tahoe, and I didn't feel like third-wheeling my parents' second honeymoon." Grace followed seconds later. "Got dumped last week, so no, nothing." Emily smiled at the screen. "How about Aspen? My treat." There was a pause, then a flood of exclamation points. Within hours, the plan was set. By morning, her friends were on a flight, and for the first time since she'd landed, Emily felt something like excitement. When Kate and Grace arrived, the suite transformed. They brought energy, laughter, and a kind of warmth that money couldn't buy. They ordered too much room service, played Christmas music far too loud, and stayed up late talking about everything: old boyfriends, bad bosses, dreams that didn't fit into polite family dinners. By the second night, they were in the outdoor hot tub, snow falling around them, steam rising into the quiet mountain air. Emily looked up at the stars and thought, this is what family should feel like. Grace raised her glass. "Two independents," she said with a grin. Kate smirked. "And two sisters who can't ruin your vacation." They all laughed. It wasn't revenge, it was relief. Emily snapped a few photos on her phone, the three of them laughing in the hot tub, plates of dessert on the table, the mountain lights glowing in the distance. Later, she posted them to her Instagram story. No captions, just images that spoke for themselves. By morning, she saw who'd viewed them first. Vanessa. Somewhere in the luxury suite across town. Her sister was probably seething, scrolling, zooming in, trying to find cracks in the smile she'd worked so hard to erase. Emily imagined her face when she realized her little lesson hadn't landed. That Emily wasn't miserable, wasn't begging for a seat at her table. No, she was laughing without her, living without her. Vanessa had tried to humiliate her, to make her feel small, but what she didn't understand was that humiliation only works if you care about the people doing the humiliating. And for the first time in her life, Emily didn't. She looked out at the snow, her reflection faint in the window, and smiled, not out of pride, but peace. Because somewhere between the pain and the silence, she'd found something she'd never had before, a quiet kind of freedom that comes when you finally stop trying to belong. She tried to humiliate me, but the moment she saw my smile online, she realized I don't break that ice. When the snowstorm ended, the silence that followed felt heavier than the cold. Emily woke up in her hotel room to sunlight spilling through the curtains, her phone buzzing on the nightstand. A single text flashed across the screen. "Uncle Richard, breakfast. 9 a.m., my treat." She knew what that meant. The old man rarely wasted words. And if he was reaching out now after everything that happened, it wasn't for casual conversation. The cafe he'd chosen was tucked into a quiet corner of the resort, far away from the crowded ski lodges and noisy fireplaces. When Emily arrived, he was already there, sitting by the window with a black coffee and a newspaper folded neatly beside his plate. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, his tone calm but measured. "You sleep all right?" Emily managed a small smile. Better than expected. He gestured for her to sit. For a moment they just watched the snow outside, silent except for the faint clinking of cutlery and the hiss of the espresso machine. Then Richard leaned back in his chair and looked at her, eyes sharp beneath his silver eyebrows. "So," he said quietly, "I heard what happened at the lodge." Emily hesitated. "I didn't want to make it a big deal. He stopped her with a raised hand. "I'd rather hear it from you." And so, she told him, every detail. The receptionist's confusion, Vanessa's smirk, her parents' silence, the words "real family" echoing like a slap. She didn't dramatize it, didn't cry or exaggerate. She just laid it out, steady and factual, like she was presenting a case file. Richard listened without interrupting. His jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained calm. And your parents said nothing? Nothing, Emily replied. They just stood there. He exhaled slowly, setting down his cup. Unbelievable. They sat in silence again, the kind that said more than anger ever could. Then Richard nodded once, as if deciding something internally. Don't worry, Emily, he said finally, his tone even. I'll take care of it. There was no drama in his voice, no promise of revenge, just a quiet certainty, the kind that made you believe him without question. 2 days later, the storm hit, but not the kind made of snow. It started small. Vanessa's credit card was declined at a boutique in downtown Aspen. She tried again, assuming it was a glitch. Same result. She called the bank, only to learn the account had been frozen per the request of the primary Uncle Richard. Next came the mortgage payment. Declined. Her calls went unanswered. Then the tuition notice from Nathan's private school arrived. Payment overdue. By the end of the week, the facade of Vanessa's perfect life began to crumble in full view. Her Instagram went quiet. No more photos of family dinners or designer coats, just silence. People noticed, friends whispered. She blamed a temporary mix-up, but the panic behind her eyes told another story. Emily didn't hear about it from Richard. She found out through the whispers, text messages from relatives, small talk from family friends. Did you hear what happened to Vanessa? Richard cut them off completely. Even your parents. Everything. At first she thought they were exaggerating. But when her mother's number appeared on her phone, followed by 3 missed calls, she knew it wasn't gossip. That night, her voicemail filled with voices that sounded nothing like the confident, dismissive family she'd grown up with. Emily, it's Mum. Please, call me back. Your uncle's being unreasonable. We can't afford the condo without his help. Emily, sweetheart, maybe you can talk to him. He listens to you. And then came Vanessa's message, her voice cracking between anger and desperation. You think this is funny, don't you? You think I deserve this? Nathan's crying because we had to cancel his classes. Do you really want to see your nephew suffer? Emily listened to each one in silence. She didn't delete them. She didn't reply either. For the first time, she realized how quiet her own phone could be when she chose it. Meanwhile, Uncle Richard carried on as if nothing had happened. He called Emily once that week just to ask how work was going. When she brought up the situation, he brushed it off with a soft laugh. Actions have consequences, Emily. I didn't do anything cruel. I just stopped rewarding bad behavior. He paused, then added, you don't have to feel guilty for what you didn't cause. But she did feel something, not guilt exactly, but a strange mix of vindication and disbelief. For years, she'd imagined what justice might look like. It turned out, it didn't need fire or shouting. Sometimes, it was as simple as one man making a phone call. The days that followed felt surreal. Emily returned to work, surrounded by co-workers who had no idea that her entire family dynamic had just imploded. She smiled during meetings, replied to emails, and quietly carried on. One evening, she sat in her apartment, scrolling through old photos, holidays, birthdays, smiles that felt staged now. She found one picture from a Christmas years ago, Vanessa holding a gift while their parents watched with pride. Emily, off to the side, holding the camera, she remembered how invisible she'd felt that day, how she'd promised herself that someday she'd stop chasing their approval. Now she finally had. The irony wasn't lost on her. Vanessa had wanted her gone, excluded, erased, and now she was the one being shut out. A few weeks later, another voicemail arrived. Vanessa again, but this time, her tone was different, soft, almost pleading. Emily, I know I messed up. I shouldn't have said what I said, but Uncle Richard's taking it too far. Please, just talk to him for me, please. Emily replayed it twice, maybe 3 times. There was no apology in the words, just fear. Fear of losing the comfort she'd built her life around. She didn't respond. Some part of her wanted to. The part that still believed family could be fixed. But the rest of her knew better. Some lessons couldn't be taught with words. A month after the trip, Richard called again. His voice was lighter this time. Just checking in, kiddo. How's the project? It's good, Emily said. We closed the deal. My team's celebrating next week. I'm proud of you, he said simply. Then, after a pause, sometimes silence teaches louder than speeches. You handled this with more grace than most adults I know. Emily smiled faintly. I didn't do anything. That's exactly why it worked, Richard replied. When the call ended, she stood by her window, watching the city lights flicker like snow. Somewhere Vanessa was probably still scrambling, selling things, making excuses, trying to fix a life that had always been built on someone else's money. Emily didn't feel joy at their downfall, just peace. The kind that comes when you finally stop needing closure. That night, She sat down with a notebook and wrote a single line at the top of a blank page. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for people who never respected your silence is to let the silence keep speaking for you. She closed the notebook, turned off her phone, and went to bed. For the first time in years, she slept without dreaming of home. For the first time, silence spoke louder than revenge. Winter slowly gave way to spring, but for the Carter family, the chill never really left. After Uncle Richard's quiet decision, life began unraveling in ways none of them had seen coming. It didn't happen overnight. It started with small inconveniences, missed payments, bills piling up, hushed arguments behind closed doors. But soon, the whispers turned into noise. Vanessa's world fell first. Without Richard's monthly deposits, the illusion of stability shattered. Her perfect suburban home with its marble countertops, new SUV, and manicured lawn was built entirely on someone else's generosity. And when that vanished, the walls began to close in. The mortgage defaulted within 2 months. The credit cards, once limitless, were frozen. She tried to sell her designer bags online, pretending it was by choice, just simplifying, she told her followers, but everyone could see the desperation underneath the captions. Daniel, her husband, started looking for a job, something he hadn't done in years. Pride made him picky at first, but bills don't care about pride. Within weeks, he was delivering packages for a logistics company, working late into the night while Vanessa sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through emails from collectors she didn't know how to answer. Her son, Nathan, didn't understand why he had to leave his private school. Vanessa tried to explain it gently. We're starting a new chapter, sweetheart, but children can hear the cracks in a parent's voice better than anyone. By summer, they'd sold the house and moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. Vanessa took a job as a receptionist for a local insurance firm. Every morning she painted on a smile, slipped into thrifted heels, and told herself this was temporary, that somehow Uncle Richard would change his mind. He did, in single quotes too. Emily watched it all unfold from a distance, not with malice, but with quiet detachment. She didn't gloat, didn't post about karma, didn't even mention it to her friends. She just went on living. Work had been good to her lately. The project she'd managed through the holidays had gone viral in the corporate world, earning her a promotion to senior project manager. Her boss called her the calm in the storm. It made her laugh, if only he knew how true that was. With her raise, she finally bought her own home, a sleek condo overlooking Lake Union. It wasn't grand, but it was hers. Every piece of furniture, every framed photo, every quiet morning coffee, it all belonged to her effort. Uncle Richard came by one weekend to see the place. He walked through the door, hands in his pockets, scanning the space with the sharp, approving look of a man who'd built his own empire. You did this on your own, he said softly. That's the kind of success no one can take away. Emily smiled. You taught me that, he chuckled, taking a seat by the window. Sometimes people need to lose everything to learn the value of anything. Your sister will figure that out, eventually. Emily wasn't sure she would, because if Vanessa had truly learned, she wouldn't have started her new project, a blog called Simply Vanessa. It appeared out of nowhere one June morning, posts about minimalist living, letting go of materialism, and finding joy in simplicity. Her photos looked serene, white walls, second-hand furniture, sunlight streaming through cheap curtains. To anyone else, it looked like transformation. To Emily, it looked like rebranding. She scrolled through one of the posts. Sometimes life strips us down to help us grow. I used to think money defined success, but now I see that love and family matter more. Underneath the words, a picture of Vanessa holding a cup of tea, posed perfectly, smile practiced. Emily almost laughed. It wasn't that she didn't want her sister to change. It was that she'd seen this performance before. Vanessa wasn't humbled. She was redecorating her ego. Still, Emily didn't comment. She just closed the page, shut her laptop, and poured herself a glass of wine. That her parents had fared no better. With Richard's financial help gone, they'd been forced to sell their retirement condo and take up part-time jobs. Her father worked at a hardware store. Her mother helped in a local daycare. They called, sometimes awkward, hesitant calls that danced around apologies without ever quite reaching them. One afternoon, her mother said softly, "Your uncle's been distant with us. We can't seem to get through to him." Emily hesitated. "Maybe he's just giving everyone time to think," her mother sighed. "I wish we hadn't let things get so divided." Emily didn't respond. Some silences were kinder than words. Months passed, seasons changed, and slowly, Emily stopped feeling like the outsider of her family, because the truth was, she'd never really been outside. She'd just been standing on higher ground. She found peace in her quiet routines, Morning jogs by the lake, coffee at her favorite cafe, weekend calls with Uncle Richard. He never mentioned Vanessa again, and neither did she. Their silence was its own kind of understanding. Every once in a while, she'd still get messages from her sister, links to the blog, half-hearted attempts at reconnection. "We should catch up sometime," one text said, followed by a smiley face that didn't quite fit. Emily never replied, not out of anger, but because she finally understood something vital. Closure doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from moving so far beyond the hurt that it can't touch you anymore. On Christmas Eve one year after the Aspen incident, Emily stood on her balcony, watching the city lights shimmer on the water. Snow had started to fall again, soft and quiet, just like that night. Her phone buzzed with a new post notification. Simply Vanessa, 1 year of growth. She almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. The post read, "Last Christmas, I learned that family isn't always easy, but it's worth fighting for." Emily stared at the screen, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She wasn't angry, just done. She set the phone down and whispered to herself, almost like a toast. She said, "I wasn't part of the real family. Turns out, I was the only real one all along." Later that night, Uncle Richard called. "Merry Christmas, kiddo." "Merry Christmas," she replied. "How's Florida?" "Sunny," he chuckled. "You know, I've been thinking about this past year. People talk about justice like it's dramatic, like it needs fire or noise. But real justice," he paused, "real justice is quiet. It just lets people sit with what they've built." Emily smiled. "Or what they've lost." Exactly. When the call ended, Emily stepped outside again. The city below sparkled like a constellation. She thought about the past year, about silence, respect, and the strange peace that comes when you finally stop trying to be understood. Maybe that was the real victory, not revenge, not recognition, but release. Because in the end, Uncle Richard was right. Respect isn't inherited, it's earned. Family isn't blood, it's choice. And silence, sometimes, is the loudest justice.